I basically did something very simple. I bought property and I waited. Now, a lot of people understand that property tends to double every 5, 7 or 10 years. And so what I did was I bought property, and rather than sell it, I waited for it to grow. And then as soon as it had grown, I withdrew the equity and used that equity to buy more and more property, and basically just kept repeating. It's not all about actually how much money you earn, it's all about what you actually do with your money that counts. The most important thing about building your property portfolio is not about what you earn. It's more important to have a goal or a dream, which is the main reason for actually doing something. So for some people, the most important thing is having a dream. It's having a reason that draws you to it. Other people, it's the pain of feeling poor that pushes you away from it. So quite often what happens is when people earn a large amount of money, like 6-figure incomes, they're so busy at work, they automatically think that they're going to get wealthy because they earn a big salary. But in essence, effectively what they do is they just spend more money. Whereas the people on lower incomes, quite often they feel poor and they feel that there's a greater need for them to actually go off and do something. And because they've got the time, because they're not as high pressured at work, they'll actually go off and do more. So the golden rule with all this thing is really you've got to have a reason for doing something, otherwise nothing will change. Now certainly if you've got a higher income, you've got the ability to make more money because the banks will lend you more. But if you're on a lower income, the most important thing for you to do is get that goal into action, do something about it, and maybe you do need to spend more time researching to find a better deal, to try and do some renovations to add more equity, but ultimately you're both in a similar position. You can both make a lot of money if you put it into action. The main decision making here about whether to buy expensive properties or cheap properties really comes down to how much money you've got, how much income you have, what your property plan is, and what your appetite is to risk. Now some people might even think that 400 grand's an expensive property. It all depends where you come from. So typically, the more expensive properties are quite often in the blue chip suburbs. Those blue chip suburbs are often in the inner cities. There's no more land to build properties, and there's a lot of demand from renters because everyone wants to commute to work very easily and live by the beaches. So typically you're going to get a large part of capital growth in those properties. Whereas less expensive properties are more in the rural areas, and by definition, because there's more land there and there's less demand, quite often you're not going to get as much growth. So what are the advantages of the cheaper ones? Well, rental yield. As you get to cheaper properties, more people can afford them, and so the rent return goes up. Whereas as you get to expensive ones, especially if they go over the $1 million, the rent returns can fall from 4 or 5% down to 1 or 2. So that's going to be a big difference between those two properties. Certainly if you can buy 2 properties rather than 1, you get to diversify. So with all the things happening around the world, like tsunamis, flooding, economic troubles, if you can choose 2 different suburbs in 2 different states, for instance, rather than the one, you've got a better chance that if something goes wrong, at least one of your properties might be okay. Certainly it depends on the median price for the area. So if you go and spend $800,000 in the wrong area, then maybe you're not going to get a good property. And again, spending $400 in a blue chip suburb, you're going to end up with a 1-bedroom unit or even a garage at some places. So again, it depends exactly where you want to buy and what your strategy is. Look, in conclusion, I'd say generally for lower income people, they're better off buying cheaper properties because it gives them a better rental yield. Whereas for wealthier people that have higher incomes and don't need, I guess, the cash losses or the tax necessary, then certainly if you buy more expensive properties, you can afford to cash flow it in the long term. When you're buying a property to renovate, it all depends what you're going to do with it. So some people are going to buy and hold, and others are going to buy, renovate, and then maybe sell. The big difference is what property you're going to get for. So certainly if you're looking at buying and holding, the main thing about making money from property in that kind of scenario is that you're really holding the property on for 30 years. So you need to get the right suburb and you need to find the right property. So really the renovating isn't the reason for buying that property, it's more the icing on the cake. Because you might be able to put 60 or 70,000 in, make a 30 or 40 profit, but it's really that property doubling every 7 or 10 years that's making you the main money. So in that kind of scenario, all about finding the right property, not concentrating on the renovation. Whereas if you're going to actually look at buying a property, renovating it and selling, it's not so important about the suburb, it's more you're buying it for that renovation and what value can you add. Now typically if you're buying in blue chip suburbs, it's very hard to find a bargain because there's lots of people on it, and because they're looking long term, they're willing to pay a higher price. So you may well need to look at the outer suburbs, where even if the market isn't moving, you can still find a deal. You can maybe subdivide it, you can maybe add another level, you can maybe gut it and turn it into something completely different, turn it around, and even if the market hasn't moved, you've actually added some value. Also, you need to concentrate on the price level. As you get to more expensive properties, there's less buyers around, it becomes more volatile, and so it could be harder to sell that property in a very short space of time. Whereas buying the cheaper properties in the outer suburbs, there's maybe slightly more demand at the lower price levels, and there's a greater chance of flipping it, but maybe less profit in there. So it's a balance of risk and reward. The other thing that you need to think about is your level of experience. It's certainly one thing to paint, recarpet, do a bit of redecoration. It's a completely different thing adding another level, subdividing, or taking out major structural works. So what I'd suggest is, if you've never done it before, stick with the really easy cosmetic things. You can still make a lot of money from that, and perhaps leave the more structural things to the professionals, or maybe till you've got more experience. So definitely don't bite off more than you can chew, because for the average person, renovations quite often take twice the amount of time and twice the amount of money as well.